every year I come to this budget seminar and one or the other person says that the budget is just an annual document. Don't read too much into it. There's somewhere the government should be signaling long-term intent. It used to be the plan. I suppose it was supposed to become the Niti Aayog, but the Niti Aayog has either not taken off or they have signaled things and haven't put them in the public domain. What is it that we should be looking at? It's just the speeches of the Prime Minister or something else?
Any other questions? Yeah, I think we'll take only two more questions. Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the speech. My question is, the government has come with the phrase of minimum government and maximum governance when it came in power. So given this context, how much the government has put its focus in this budget in improving the level of governance?
So my name is Sandhya from NCER. My question is to Dr. Rathim Roy, and this is regarding base erosions and profit shifting, which is happening by multinational corporations in India. And this is with reference to a study from NIPFP and one reference from Nigeria study. So because India is a country with very high level of corporate taxation, which is around 30%, and the vision of the government is to reduce it to 25%. But so what do you think, what is exactly happening for this? So current budget, including tax rates and all the exemptions, Finance Minister said that corporate taxation is going to be around 29%. So it's not a major change, and they have proposed this reduction for like last 2 years. So what is your view on this part? And second is, our government has also proposed to follow a range of fiscal deficit to be targeted rather than a point. And so how do you think this is going to help? This is probably going to make government more relaxed in achieving fiscal consolidation over time, or some advantages over. Thank you.
Okay. I think at the moment there's no option but to just triangulate. There's a lot of stuff happening, and I mean, I think one way of thinking about it is, very frankly, what this budget signals is the basic parameters have been pretty constant for the last 10 years, right? Smart cities is redo, JNURM redux. I actually don't buy this thing that this government has a special emphasis, which the last one did. We are back to Narega. All the other stuff has been talked about before. I think the question is, what's the balance between the urgent and the important, right? So in a sense, you get political flack. There's 2 years of bad monsoon. So you say, well, let's go and signal something sort of, right now. I think, so in that sense, there is probably a very deep political consensus actually on. So nobody even feels the need to articulate, right? What that balance is. I mean, there isn't actually a major difference. PMGSY is UPA, Narega is UPA, irrigation is actually a pretty old thing. It's just that when you didn't have crisis, when you had 10 years of good monsoon, we just let that ball drop, right? So I think the real seesaw that's happening is between this kind of what's the urgent and what's the important. I think the strategic bit, which I think relates to the second question in a sense is about health, is that I would probably now look at it more in a sense sectorally, right? Which is, so one is the diagnostics question. And clearly that's, the economic survey is supposed to be that diagnostics, right? And even that survey is in a sense, absolutely wonderful, but it's again torn between, there's the immediate diagnostics. Growth is slowing down, what do we do? And then there's the kind of the long, wonderful list of sort of all the, but what we probably need is, in a sense, these kind of sectoral diagnostics, right? Which is, okay, pensions. What is the framework we want for pensions 15, 20 years from now? Healthcare. Should we be strategizing for a public health system, or should we be strategizing for a purely private? What's the framework? Education, right? What's the mix of public-private you actually want? So I would actually like to see is those kinds of sectoral frameworks, in light of which then a lot of interventions and reforms make sense, right? And that is what the Planning Commission or the Niti Aayog now should be sort of doing. But I suspect what they'll end up with is a bit of project implementation, a bit of fighting, a bit of residual sort of analysis. But you need those sector-specific frameworks.
Okay. Ratna, you want to address some
Just a couple of few direct questions. I want to sort of see. I think there are two other dimensions that I like to add. Very important point Pratap is making. They're not trivial at all. Don't forget, this country is fundamental. Well, the first point I want to make is these medium-term visions of where a country ought to go are normally articulated by political parties before they come to government and contested the political terrain. So when they come to government, what the civil service then does is help them build enabling frameworks if they go wrong to articulate these. We do not have this process in our country because what everyone wants in the long term, the Prime Minister of India has said very clearly. When he first came to power, he said, these are the sort of end results I want. House for everybody, I can't remember, decent work, blah, blah, blah. So we know what we want. But we don't have a framework of how to get there because we don't have a disagreement even on how to get there. In the US, you'd have different views between Democrats and Republicans on how to achieve, if you like, a common public policy. Second problem is that this is not a rules-based country, this is a discretion-based country. And discretion is the enemy of the long term. And the civil services power comes from discretion. And the tax administration's power comes from discretion. And my policy influence comes from discretion. Because I'm asked questions every day, it keeps me permanently relevant. Nobody's asking me to write, a 4-year tax policy plan. What I get is calls from the finance ministry, ye GST ka RNR theek kar do, ye Anrega pe kitna spending kharab hua. So that rot, until that changes, I think this larger thing will not happen. So within that, yes, we work, as you say, within the possible and hope that things change. And third, don't forget we're a gerontocracy. And we have been one for 20 years. So as I grow older, I find my willingness to think about telescopic foresight goes down. So why do you expect people who are in their 60s and 70s to have telescopic foresight? Anyway, on the question of, you asked me two precise questions on the fiscal deficit. I'd like to just respond to those and stop. Oh dear, I've lost the page. Why don't you move on in the interest of time and I'll come back.
Sure. Yeah, agriculture and...
Yeah, so I don't profess to have answers to very profound questions about how you actually incentivize agriculture in the right way. We've essentially adopted a My-Baap approach to agriculture. That needs a fundamental change in thinking about how agriculture can be market responsive and how we can provide the basic minimum protection that's required because of commodity price fluctuations, because of weather, because of a range of different things. But the world over, countries have done it, and some countries do it with great profligacy, some do it with great parsimony, all depending on their ability and the role of the farm sector in those countries. So it's not rocket science, but we are embedded in a system that does not want to get out of that My-Baap attitude. And I think that's fundamentally the problem. So we throw all these things, an insurance scheme, which really cannot work, or it cannot be sustained, to farm and fertilizer subsidies. So it requires this long-term thinking and where we are going. Just one quick thought, there needs to be somebody, some group, whether it's, I guess it has to be in South Block, a group of 10, 15 men and women who do nothing but worry about the future. And everything that is going through the system, as it's going through, they ask themselves, and they're empowered to ask that question, what is this going to mean 15 years from now? And then work back and say, well, this doesn't make sense. That's not the way the world is going. We can't work with a tax GDP ratio that we have. It's just unthinkable. And I don't know, we don't have that group that's insulated from the day-to-day firefighting, that is used to and only empowered and required to think about the future, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. Because had we started 15 years back, we probably would be a little better off today. So I would urge, I don't know, whoever is the influence maker here, there are many people who write all the time, please think about something about our future.
Rajat, you would like to come in with the issues?
Just very quickly, I really like that question on agriculture and also Rinku's question on cities. So let me make a quick point. I defer to Ashok Visandas, who's sitting here, chairman of the Agricultural Costs and Prices Commission, and my colleague Ashok Gulati, who's not here, but he's done. But I think that question on agriculture needs to be addressed very, very seriously. So, and after all, the budget is just a, as you rightly said, it's a method of allocation. You can't expect it to fix the problems, but those problems need to be fixed. And climate change will only make it much worse than the problem is. And so therefore, Sheikh has alluded to this, groundwater, subsidies, fertilizers, and production yields that are going to go down, production shortages, and so on and so forth. So I think that's a terribly important question. There is, there are bits and pieces that are, scattered around, but they need to be integrated and a consistent policy on agriculture. So you have the Agricultural Price Marketing, APMC Acts that are going to be repealed and modernized. Should you continue to grow rice in the Punjab? Should you continue to grow sugarcane in Maharashtra? These are important questions and they need to be addressed. So I really like that question, and especially because you're going to see fragmentation, you're going to see land given up for commercial, for urbanization, for infrastructure development. So it's likely that area under production, apart from being fragmented, as you said, is also likely to come down. So these are very serious questions that we need to address. On Rinku's point, I think when I alluded in my presentation to urban and how cities are going to be the engines of growth, I actually had the same idea, and I went to the budget, what you're saying, and tried to see whether there's any allocation for cities. And
of income. I think as a country we need to develop some kind of a human resource management strategy as to how we are going to rehabilitate these people and get them into alternate occupations.
Okay, I think Ratin has found his question.
So, yeah. Capitalization, I just refer you to what the Minister of State for Finance said yesterday and the Finance Minister said. This is actually phase 2 of bank recapitalization. Phase 1 is already over, which was the benchmark governance reforms and the identification of where we can have recovery with respect to stranded assets. It's only after that resolution process is over that you think about bailing out anything. So you have that calibrated bailout happening this year, which I happen to think is inadequate but inevitable given the fiscal deficit target. Second, on the corporate tax rate, madam, the problem is that nobody pays 30%. Nobody. And the bigger you are, the less you pay. The average effective corporate tax rate for companies over 500 crores is 22.56%, and the average overall in the sample is 24.3%. So what you're getting here is a tax increasing measure. The government is saying that it will get rid of exemptions, which is why this happens, lower the corporate tax rate, and thereby make more money also. It's the equivalent of the Laffer curve in the corporate sector, if I ever saw one. I'm very excited that we're going to do this. But let's see, because there's Ambani, Adani, lots of people are going to lose if this happens, and I don't know whether that is going to work out politically. The other question you asked me was the FRBM. This is very important, and I'm so happy that we can conclude on a fiscal note, since this is about the budget. Look, I think there are 3 questions that this FRBM review are going to ask. They're not going to be about the fiscal deficit target. Should we be worrying more about borrowing to consume, which is euphemistically called here the quality of the fiscal deficit, than the total amount we borrow? Because there are very good reasons to worry about the total amount we borrow. There are good reasons to worry about how much we borrow to consume. Should we be taking a fresh look at FRBM for general government? So rather than have an architecture where you have individual states forming FRBMs and the center doing one, should we have a better articulated, generalized FRBM with obligations on the center which are linked to obligations of the states in a calibrated way, right? Third, should we be looking in this FRBM at the institution of a medium-term fiscal roadmap from which the FRBM derives, rather than imposing an FRBM constraint and then using that to derive a medium-term fiscal roadmap? So this is a very welcome, fresh exercise. It is not an attempt